To talk to us a little bit more about the scourge of poverty in the country is Thembinkosi Dlamini, who's the Economic Justice Lead at Oxfam South Africa. Thanks very much indeed for joining us and welcome to the programme.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks for having us.
Before COVID-19, we already had an alarming number of people living in poverty. I think I read a statistic that said something like nearly 50% of adults. And so COVID-19 just made a bad situation worse, I guess.
Yes, that's very, very true. In Oxfam, we have gone further to look at specifically the issue of hunger in South Africa as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we found that before the coronavirus hit, 13.7 million South Africans did not have access to enough food. Now, with the pandemic, the number went up to 15 million people who did not have enough access to food. When we look further at the numbers, they were indicating that as much as 50% of the population really were struggling to make ends meet and have access to enough food in terms of the daily energy intake that is required for one to have a good enough standard of living. So the figures were very, very worrying.
All right, let's define poverty and hunger. What does that mean?
Well, when we're talking in terms of poverty, obviously we are talking about the standard of living. When you have a good enough standard of living, you are able to afford food, shelter, and other basic necessities. We could consider you to be above the poverty line. When you are food hungry, however, is a worse off situation because it means that you can hardly afford the daily dietary requirement in rand terms. So the statistic that is released today says that you would need 624 rands every month for you to afford the minimum dietary requirement that is required for one to live a normal life. So if you do not have access to that amount of money in a month, people have to adopt certain coping mechanisms. For instance, they have to skip a meal maybe in a day, or go for a few days without a meal. Sometimes the choices of foods that they have to take are those foods that have the ability to fill one's stomach without essentially giving them the nutrition that is required for them to live a healthy life. So in essence, that is what it means.
All right. I mean, for us, I guess we're quite lucky to think 624 rand a month. A lot of people will spend that in a day, a couple of days. And so that there's so many people who can't afford even that 624 rand is quite alarming.
Yes, it is a serious matter. I mean, if you think, for instance, the COVID grant, 350 rand, obviously it's a little bit on the low side. It cannot even afford one person to meet the dietary requirement that they need to have to lead a healthy life. So if you go to the shops nowadays, one of the things that you can immediately see is that the prices have increased, especially in the past 2 months or so. So really people are struggling when you look at the cost of living, you look at the cost of energy, transportation, medication, and the fact now that people have to travel more to go to the next shopping center that is there after the looting and destruction of property. And people have to go longer distances to reach job opportunities. So all of these factors seem to be suggesting that the people out there are having a really tough time.
And I would imagine that the impact is different in different parts of the country. Rural may be feeling it a bit more because they have less access to jobs.
Yes, certainly the rural communities are having it really tough because they've a reduced number of choices when it comes to where they can look around for opportunities, but also service providers like shops, shopping malls. And now, because the value chains were decimated as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and then the 2021 pandemic of looting and destruction of property, it means that the escalation in prices is even hitting rural people more. Job opportunities are not there. You have seen, obviously, pictures of people being called for menial jobs in farms, where they really came in huge numbers trying to offer themselves up for employment, when you find that the recruiters had so little in terms of the number of opportunities. Yet people were really hungry. They wanted a job, but there were few jobs running around.
And also the challenge for black people in particular in the country is that they often have an extended family that they have to take care of. And so that if you lose your job, there's maybe more than one household that gets affected immediately.
Yes, in particular, rural communities in and around South Africa with black families, they rely mostly on a combination of their farm incomes, trading, fishing, and also the remittances that they get from the people who are working in city centers like Johannesburg and others. So when those people who are working in the city centers lose their jobs, the situation becomes even more dire for the rural communities who depend on these people and their remittances.
What is it about, I don't know, our economy, the structure of our society that results in so much poverty?
Well, the structure of our economy is skewed in favor of accumulation, in particular by the people at the top 5% of people, the people that we consider to be rich. So these are the people who are asset rich, and because of these assets, which we call wealth, they use them to accumulate even more income at the detriment of the majority of the people. That is why in Oxfam we've been complaining for quite a number of years about the endemic inequality situation in South Africa, which is related to some structural challenges with the economy and the way that people in the townships were just put out there in order to serve the city and industrial hubs without any means whatsoever for them to be able to do a little bit of some farming to supplement their incomes, or also trading opportunities. So the structure of the economy favors the sort of big corporations being able to access the masses of peoples in townships and the rural areas and supplying them with goods and services. So there is nothing much in terms of some form of township economy that is going on for townships to trade amongst one another, the people trading from amongst themselves, and therefore being able to generate some form of income at that level, which then sustains those households.
Oxfam is a huge organization, global in nature. So I'm wondering if there are lessons that we can learn from other parts of the world to try and reduce poverty in South Africa. What needs to be done?
Well, one of the things that we've been saying is that we need to engage in what we call a people's economy, which is an economy that is inclusive in nature, which tries to avail opportunities to the majority of the people instead of a few, starting with educational opportunities, skills transfer, innovation, and also some hardcore skills that people can use to generate income in their own backyards, like households, like in the township and so forth, instead of an economy that says you are just educated enough for you to be able to go out there to be a job seeker. So we need more and more people who are engaged in economic activity, in cottage industries, and so forth, so that there is really a lot of exchange that is happening in and amongst the people where they stay, as compared to every rand that you get, say maybe of 350, and then you take it to the bigger multinational, the conglomerates, the supermarket chains, etc.
I mean, we talk about poverty and hunger often in terms of statistics and numbers, but there are far-reaching consequences, aren't there? I mean, when I think about children in particular, you get stunted growth, you have less production in schools as a result of being hungry. There's so many far-reaching consequences, and if you don't have a workforce that is healthy, the economy doesn't grow, and then the whole cycle continues.
Yes, precisely. When people have situations with the level of incomes, you will find situations where people start to be absent from work, which affects their productivity, simply because they do not have enough money for them to be able to go to work on a day-to-day basis. And you are correct. When it comes to children stunting and therefore performance in school, it certainly means we are passing on the poverty to the next generation, because children who do not receive adequate education and are not ready to get the adequate knowledge, skills, and attitudes at the point where they're supposed to go to school, it means they are less prepared for a future of work or engaging in the economy, especially at par with the competition in the rest of the world.
Thembinkosi Dlamini, thank you very, very much indeed for joining us and sharing your thoughts with us today.
Thank you, Peter, for having us.
Okay, so that's Thembinkosi Dlamini from Oxfam talking about this worrying statistic that we heard from Stats SA today. And the poverty line, they're saying, is 624 Rand a month is the minimum that's required for you to survive. And there are more than 50% of the people who are below that line. Very alarming. We'll have more for you after this.